Nice place for a beer. Go downstairs and you will see a Roman well. And that reminds us in a way that this was a site we would be within a Roman fortress here, which was a strictly disciplined place where the Second Legion was out in 55, and they were crack troops. Vespasian, who went on to be emperor, he was in charge. Although he may not have visited us. But anyway, so there we are. It's a reminder because you'll see the Roman well there. And another thing you'll see right beside the well is the skeleton.
Oh!
And the skeleton is a reminder that this was a cemetery for 1,000 years. This was the cathedral yard, so-called here. And from the early Christian times, which started in about AD 300, people were buried here. 1,000 years they were buried here. 1637 they moved to, on St Bartholomew's Day, to Bartholomew Yard, which those of you who know Exeter know is up in the northwest part of the city. City. But this was definitely in the cathedral grounds. 250,000 corpses under our feet.
Oh, I was going to say it really still there.
So if you see their arms sticking up. Okay, so that's the little house, and now we look behind one of the people. So he's a person, and he's a real Tudor, as you see from his dates. He's a Tudor man, and he was born here, went to the grammar school. He was selected really by Queen Elizabeth I. She was very good, wasn't she? She was a very good monarch. She was very shrewd at picking good people around her. She picked this guy because he was a theologian. And he went for the middle way. We'd had extreme Catholicism with Mary, her half-sister. We'd had extreme Protestantism with her father, Henry VIII, and Edward VI, her half-brother. She wanted the middle way. Selected this guy. He was a great thinker, theologian, and he wrote the Annals of Ecclesiastical Polity. 8 great volumes. I've had a look at them, incredibly boring, very hard to understand. But it was on the basis of that that the Anglican Church was really formed, and it set the tone and the direction for the Anglican Church towards moderation. But he was an expert at rational thought rather than emotional thought. So we'd say a great man, an Exeter man. We claim him. This was put up by his descendants in 1907, made of Portland stone. Perfect marble, I'm not sure why we do. Right here, let's move along. We've got more to see. Oh, yeah. Now, this is the park, our second park. You've noticed coming across, of course, this is the Cathedral Close, and we just walked across the Cathedral Green, and you see these lovely medieval-based houses, which were where the canons lived. There were 500 ecclesiastical clergymen of all kinds living in this area. It is a lot. The stone, characteristically red, comes from the heavy tree. Good quarry there, and that's, those who are interested in stone, we'll talk about it later maybe, but it's a breccia, Permian breccia. Now why we stopped here is John Grace's home, because he's on the plaque. Now he was an Exeter boy, he partly educated here, but when he was 14, he went off and he joined the army, and I think I've got that right, and he went off and he fought in the American War of Independence. And he excelled, he distinguished himself there. So much so that they gave him a senior administrative post in what is now Canada. It was called Upper Canada in those days. Now it's Ontario, and he founded the city of Toronto.
Wow.
Now, although he was a soldier, he was there for 6 years, he did a lot of good in an administrative way. He introduced anti-slavery laws a good 30 or 40 years before they were introduced in Britain, and trial by jury. He introduced that, made sure that the legal system was working well. He left there, and he, I think, took up an appointment in Haiti, where he was criticised for being rather draconian in his methods, and he came here on the way to take up a position, and there's a little dispute whether it was India or Portugal. Let's say it was Portugal, and he died right here in a house. Now the Canadians are interested in this man, of course, because if you go to Toronto, there's Simcoe Street and Simcoe Square and all this stuff. He's quite well known there. And I wondered if there is, yes, Wolford Chapel.
Near Dunkeswell?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There it is. And dear little chapel, kept up by the Canadians. And you can, if you go up Hunterton Road, you'll see a sign. It's the Canadian Chapel. And there's the man himself, John Graves Simcoe. And actually, it's not surprising that he did. He was buried up there because that's where his house was.
All right.
That's why, because otherwise it seems rather strange.
Sure.
An extra man, but that's where he lived.
Still nice to have the plaque here.
Yeah, and the Colletons, Louisa Colleton, who was the last with that name, Colleton, they were neighbours.
All right.
Because Colleton Crescent, of course, is well known here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we go toddling along, we're going to go into lovely Suttonhay. The Veitch family, famous Veitch family. And here we are. It was a bit of a Dick Whittington story, really, because young, I think he was called John, the first one. He came down from Jedburgh in the lowlands of Scotland, and it was he appeared in London, and his great talent shone through, and he was given jobs to run gardens. And next thing you know, it's an important family, importing a lot of stuff. So a lot of the gardens that we're seeing today, there's no doubt about it, they would have had an impact. They had an impact. Of course, these guys were planning for the future. You see that when you go around to different gardens, don't you? Star Head and places. They had no idea what it was going to look like. Well, they did, sorry, that they planned for it, but they never saw it. They were planning for 100 years ahead. Veitch family, wonderful. Now, Sir Harry with the wonderful beard, in the 1800 or something, 1860s or something, he got a knighthood, but also he started the Chelsea Flower Show.
Really?
And there's a moment before every Chelsea show when they have a little quiet time and they drink his health. So I'm told. Right, let's go over to this corner. There's an interesting man to talk about. I wanted to talk about a man, before we talk about this park behind us, a man who created what we're looking at, what we're in. And this is a great vantage point. You can look right the way up inside. This is a Georgian, as you see, terraced area. And there's some other places. There's Colleton Crescent we just mentioned. There's Barnfield Crescent back there. And they were created by a man called William Nosworthy. And he was a yeoman's son from Widdicombe and the Moor, and I think it's quite extraordinary that he had the confidence and the know-how, the expertise to build these beautiful Georgian terraced houses. So Matthew Nosworthy, genius, I think. But really, this corner, you cannot read it. It's to the most decorated non-combatant in the Great War. Now, why was he a non-combatant? Because he was a churchman. He was born here in that house, in 1863, and he took holy orders in the 1890s. And when war was declared in 1914, he was one of the first to volunteer. But they rejected him because he was over 50. But he was a very determined man, and he then joined as a stretcher bearer, along with Quakers and other people like that. But he somehow inveigled his way in, as a padre, into the 8th Battalion of the Lincolnshire Regiment. That was his regiment. And then followed a surprising and amazing series of brave acts as a padre. He was, I'm going to read these because I can't remember it all. In 1917, Passchendaele, he got a DSO. It was his first thing. The citation read, for conspicuous bravery and devotion to duty. He went into the open to help bring in wounded, and on discovering a man buried in the mud, whom it was impossible to extricate, he remained under fire, ministering to his spiritual and bodily comforts until the man died. 1 month later, he was awarded the Military Cross. Citation: for repeatedly going under heavy fire to help stretcher bearers during the attack. So you've got DSO and an MC. I think that might be enough. But he got a VC too. In the spring of 1918, he was at the Somme, and there were 3 dates of that April, the 5th, the 25th and 27th, when he did other acts of conspicuous bravery. When he was told he was nominated for a Victoria Cross, he said, "I really must protest." He's a very modest man. But however, he went to get his VC from, as was the custom, from the King, and the King gave him his VC. And there's a photograph of them getting his VC. Now here's this man, he's over 50, and the King is saying, "Don't go back. Don't go back. I'm going to give you a chaplaincy, a royal chaplaincy. A sinecure, really. You just finish your work." It was now 1917 plus. No, he had to go back to his boys, as he called them. When he was challenged, by the way, by the sentries, he was supposed to give his rank and serial number, all that stuff. He never could remember those things, so he said, "It's only me, boys." But the tragedy was, he went back and he was wounded, and he died 10 days later, so he obviously had a rotten end, and it was only a few weeks before the end of the war. So he's one of our Exeter heroes. Now, on the theme, I was looking through my notes to see if I could find a photo of, an amazing photo actually, of just a shell, sorry I haven't got it, it's the front shell of the Georgian facade. You notice these are all new houses, and they've done it fairly well, I think, actually, but this was destroyed by the war. Anything, as you can see, like that is almost certain to be 1950s.
New brick.
Yeah, new brick, and I think as they go, not too bad. So this was moved actually from the old Princess Hay shopping area when they developed it. We're going to walk through it in a minute, but we won't dally. But that was 50 years on, that they were remembering the people who died, and this is the story, and you probably know this plaque anyway. This iconic photograph, which is in the High Street. This is St Stephen's Church, we have a tour of the Blitz, which, if you're interested in the Blitz, we'll go into in great detail. It was a Baedeker raid. Does that mean anything to you? It was, the fact was that Hitler in 1940 bombed London terribly during the daylight hours. The Battle of Britain occurred, gave him a bloody nose. He didn't, made him think twice about it. In the autumn of that year, Coventry, that was a daylight raid, but then they began night raids. And the night raids began, of course it was very tricky because they didn't have radar, but they had various beams and all the rest of it. And then that went through 1941, and 1942 in March, the Royal Air Force bombed Lübeck, which is near Kiel on the Baltic, and it had submarine pens, which was a kind of excuse, because World War, they were still saying in 1942 they were actually concentrating, early 1942, on military targets. But that was the propaganda. The truth was that they knew that if they were bombing a city, it was indiscriminate, and a lot of civilians were being killed. Thousands in London. So anyway, after Lübeck, it is said that Hitler got together with Goebbels, and they said, we will try and break the spirit of the British, and they selected soft targets. Targets that had 3 stars in the Baedeker guidebook. Top stars. So we've got Exeter, number 1, Bath, York, Norwich, Canterbury. 5 cities. Targeted, very little defence. Exeter had no idea it was going to be bombed. The shock to Exeter was incredible. So it was building up though through April. They were getting Morrison shelters by the stackful because they were realising by the end of April something was afoot. And on the 3rd of May, that night, going into the 4th, they were bombed, 10,000 incendiaries and hundreds of high explosive bombs. And I'll just show you a picture now of where we're kind of standing. We left the cathedral and we came up Southern Hay. Are you seeing that?
Mm.
And then we're just now outside what was a beautiful
Crescent.
Georgian crescent circus, Bedford Circus, which we talked about Matthew Nosworthy. This was built just before Matthew Nosworthy, so 1780, 1790, that decade. And it was a fabulous 24 houses with a chapel, and it was like, you know, if you imagine Bath in Exeter, it was absolutely lovely. It was annihilated by the bombs, and what the Luftwaffe left, the Exeter City Council pulled down. Wouldn't have done it now. In fact, interesting that the central government was saying to Exeter and other cities, do not pull these things down, keep them. But the local councils at the time, it was a kind of survival. They had no idea when the bombing was going to stop. They wanted to keep people safe. And so when they'd finished pulling the circus down, it looked like that, nothing left. And this is a view from the high street, looking back across to the cathedral. You see, the whole of the shopping area was destroyed. The whole of this area here was gone. A huge area. So within the city wall, here we are, we're just outside it, within the city wall, it is reckoned that 2/3 of the city was destroyed. Either destroyed on that night, mainly, or pulled down soon afterwards to make safe.
Would they have, was it a nighttime thing, did you say?
Yeah, night.
So there was no way they would have used that circle, that crescent, as like a guide, a visual guide?
Very good point. No, they
it's
might have
quite-
done. It was a moonlight night.
Yeah, it's quite prominent, isn't
They
it?
might have done. They could have seen it. You see, why didn't they hit the cathedral? Well, they did. They did attack the cathedral, and 2 of the flying buttresses were taken out. If a third had gone, the engineers, the civil engineers reckon that the whole roof might have gone down. So it was a close-run thing, but they tended to keep the big, this is what we hear, the big landmarks, so that when they returned, there'd be somewhere to follow. It was a moonlight night.
Interesting.
They came up the estuary, 40 Junkers, 88s, the fighter bombers, and they really couldn't miss that night because it was moonlight and they were just seeing the reflection up on the estuary. But then when they got to us, you're quite right, they might have been looking at, oh look, there we go, boom. You know, they can't do that. The accuracy was there, I suppose.
And so that was retaliation for Lubeck,
So,
yeah?
so. I mean,
But there were submarines at Lubeck.
submarine pens, yes.
Right, okay.
And of course, one of the things that Hitler, Prime Minister Churchill, was so hot on was the North Atlantic supplies coming across from America, really keeping Britain alive. And the U-boats were causing such devastation at that time, early 42, 41, that anything that could protect those ships, any way of hitting the U-boats, none of these bombings can be justified, of course.
Yeah,
It's war,
ultimately,
it's
yeah.
revolting, but it was a tit for tat. It got worse and worse, as we know, and there was Dresden, and it got... Away from that for a minute, let's talk about the wall briefly. I won't spend long on it because it's not really our remit today, but this is a reminder that Exeter is built on a volcanic area, volcanic trap this is called. So millions of years ago, Exeter was on top of a volcano. And then this is the familiar stone to so many of us, the red stone, which began being quarried from the Middle Ages, 1350 onwards. So if you see that, you know it's pulled out of the heavy tree quarry after 1350. And you see it's a breccia or breccia, and it's like a riverbed, isn't it? And those red salts, or iron salts. There are other stones. I think Longdown, is that what you...
Yeah.
Yes, Longdown, that's fine. Oh, I can't see it at the moment, but there's a stone which we might see later on. Stone, beer stone. The west front of the cathedral is made of sandstone like that.
I said, no, basically, I know Oh, I know the movie.
Site, Debenhams.
You said it would take you 20 minutes.
So you're probably thinking this guy brought us to Debenhams. What the heck's going on? Well, there's a park here, and I think it's so often the case that with villages and towns and cities, waters under the earth. Somebody wrote a lovely book with that title, and it's the sort of history under us. We're crisscrossed with history wherever we are in a town. And under this place, there was a Dominican friary for over 300 years. And then along comes Henry VIII, 6 wives, and as you know, dissolution of the monasteries, which is a euphemism for destruction, heavy destruction. And so he pulled down, as usual, the place of prayer, the church, and the chapter house, and the dormitory. That was his thing. And the rest of it was often an L-shaped thing, because they were very often based on a cloistered quadrangle. The rest of it, the L-shaped thing, he sold to his mates. And that was the Russell family of Tavistock, who made Dukes of Bedford. So this was Bedford House. Bedford House, established by Henry VIII's way of making money. Then the big date really for this thing was we're coming whizzing up now to the Civil War, 1644. What was happening? Charles I, doing fairly well. It was on a sort of knife edge really between the parliamentarian forces and the royalist forces. And he was in Oxford with his army, but his wife was hugely pregnant, and he thought it'd be safer to go down to the walled city of Exeter. So safe. So she came down here and had a baby here, Bedford House, and had the baby christened in the cathedral just there. But straight now, a mother will realise, will feel this much more than anyone else. She left that baby aged 2 weeks because Fairfax and the army were threatening to take Exeter. And it seems strange that she left so, but she did. And they dealt with Fairfax's creation. Let's go back a little bit to Leofric. Now, in 1050, Leofric, the Bishop of the Southwest, came into Exeter. He was a friend of Edward Confessor, and he was brought by the hand by the King and the Queen into Northgate, and Exeter was kind of pleased because at that point we were a cathedral city, able to call ourselves a cathedral city. Leofric. Now Leofric was a fine man, and he accumulated 55 books in his library, which was remarkable at the time, if you think about it. These books were not, they had no paper, so they're all written very carefully on vellum, which was a parchment from animals. Amazing. Anyway, we'll talk about Thomas
Fairfax.
Bodley.
Oh,
Thomas Bodley in a little while. But Thomas Bodley, come over here. You'll get asphyxiated behind there.
Yeah.
Thomas Bodley, I'll tell his story later on, but the point was he called for books from Exeter. Because the Bodleian Library, as you may know, in Oxford is an amazing library. And contribution was made from Exeter, from Leofric's library. They sent him up to Oxford. There was one book which was so badly damaged, it had been used as a carpenter's block. Somebody put a glue on it, and the glue had all dripped over it, and somehow it had caught fire. But it was the most valuable of the collection, called the Exeter book. And if you make an appointment, they don't make an appointment, there are times when the bishop's library is open, and I do recommend going in there. The Exeter book is there. Now what it was a Saxon book. It goes right the way back to 900 AD. Very, very old. And they wrote then in quite a delightful way, really. They were very in tune with nature, of course, and with jokes. Jokes is the thing. And these were riddles. And here we are. This is called the riddle sculpture. And we'll take this one as a... Some of these riddles were very, very long. And some of them were rather risque, obscene, ribald. And you wouldn't put them where the children could read them. But But anyway, this is what it says. You have to guess what this creature is. Silent is my dress when I step across the earth, reside in my house or ruffle the waters. Sometimes my dormants and the wind lifts me over the livings of men. The power of clouds carries me far over the people. My white pinions, resound very loudly. They ring with a melody. I sleep not on the soil. I settle at the grey waters, a travelling spirit. Now what have we got? We've got a creature that obviously flies, white, makes a noise when it flaps its wings.
I'd say a swan.
Yes! And the way they've arranged this is that you can see the clue. I mean, we've got the clue now. The answer, if you come around here, is reflected in there. It says swan.
Oh yeah,
Isn't that a cunning ploy?
that's amazing.
So there are 6 of these, and you can.
I
have
all
to-
do that every day when you walk past something.
Can you just see it reflected?
You know, my daughter.
Don't like this. I hate it. I hate it. But this is the gatehouse, and of course it reflects. It's not really people plants or tarps, is it? But it is the Norman gatehouse. 1068. William was very keen to establish a garrison in Exeter to keep the Saxons down, particularly because Harold of the Battle of Hastings, got an arrow in the eyes, you know, but his mother lived here in Exeter. So he was very keen to come down and establish a garrison. So we've got a curtain wall here going around and about. The great wall behind that, so it's like a curtain like that. And this is the gatehouse, and you see it's been filled in and so on. So this is one of the oldest Norman structures in the country, still standing. This just gives us the creeps because it's a story about so-called witches being burned, actually hanged, I should say. And Exeter has the doubtful distinction of being the last city in England to have hanged a so-called witch. These, of course, were often ladies who lived on their own, who were using herbs to help people, and they were perfectly harmless in nearly every case. But the last one, Agnes Prest, the last one in Southernhay, she was dogged by her family for saying that she did not believe in transubstantiation, which is the Roman Catholic belief that the bread and wine that you take in your Mass is actually transubstantiated to the body and blood of Christ. And there were a lot of people who couldn't go as far as that. They couldn't say, I believe that. So if they would be dogged by, she was dogged by the family, and this, I know. So it's a very dark side of human nature, isn't it?
So William the Conqueror did actually get in the end. You said that
Yes.
he couldn't get in.
Yeah. Now, to tell you that was a great story, really, because he couldn't get in. We had this massive wall, and it was well kept up. But he had to negotiate. He was going to get in somehow. But it was going to be a long siege, and he had a lot of other things to do soon after the conquest. So 18 days of siege went on. They were just sitting outside, really. They were really based 4 miles outside Eastgate. But they used to come in every so often. And to start with, there was quite a buoyant moon in Exeter, and a boy did a moonie. As soon as he saw William coming up, bad mistake, because by that time William got a few hostages, and he took somebody's eyes out right in front of the... So he was a pretty evil sort of guy, William. But anyway, so after the 18th day, they'd got to negotiated settlement. Now, who had negotiated for the city mostly but Leofric, the bishop? He'd saved countless lives because he was a very able, good man. And so he negotiated. The deal was not to trash the city, don't increase taxes, but you can have all Githa's land, which is 6 acres. And finally, William said, and I will build a garrison to keep you down. So those are the 4 things.
Wow. And Harold's mother, what happened to her?